Have you ever wondered if the walls around you were built to protect your life or merely to contain your labor? Do you truly believe that the hand-carved joints of a 19th century home were born from a sense of artistic passion rather than a desperate race against the clock? Is the scent of fresh pine in an old workshop a memory of nature, or is it the smell of a resource being rapidly consumed by an insatiable urban machine? Could you survive in a world where the sun was a luxury and the air was a thick mixture of sawdust and coal soot? What if the romanticized image of the humble craftsman was actually a mask for a brutal industrial transition that demanded every drop of your physical endurance? You walk through the narrow, unpaved streets of a growing American city in the mid-1800s, where the skyline is no longer defined by the height of trees, but by the rising brick chimneys of textile mills. The ground beneath your boots is a chaotic slurry of mud, animal waste, and discarded wood shavings. There is no quiet here. The silence of the pre-industrial era has been replaced by a rhythmic metallic throb that vibrates through the soles of your feet. You approach a modest timber-framed structure, squeezed between a sprawling iron foundry and a crowded tenement house. This is not a quaint cottage. It is a functional cell of production. As you push open the heavy oak door, the transition is instantaneous and violent to your senses. The air inside is dense, a visible fog of fine white dust hanging in the pale shafts of light that struggle to penetrate the grime-streaked windows. You feel the grit immediately settling on your skin, entering your lungs with a dry, sweet sting that tastes of white pine and cedar. To your left, a long workbench, scarred by decades of blades and hammers, dominates the narrow space. The room is cold, yet there is a stagnant heat radiating from the small cast-iron stove in the corner, burning low-quality anthracite that fills the rafters with a sharp, sulphurous tang. You observe the tools hanging on the walls, not as polished museum pieces, but as extensions of a tired body. Each plane, saw, and chisel is worn where the grip of a hand has pressed into the wood for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The floorboards groan under your weight, echoing the structural strain of a building forced to house both a family and a factory. You notice the contrast between the raw, aromatic lumber stacked near the door and the blackened, soot-covered ceiling above. This is the friction of the new world. Outside, the American dream is being forged in steel and steam, but inside this room, you are witnessing the slow erosion of the independent artisan. The city is growing upward and outward, demanding doors, window frames, and floorboards at a pace the human hand was never meant to sustain. You see the stack of unfinished chair legs in the corner, identical and soulless, ordered by a local hotel that no longer cares for the unique grain of the wood, only for the speed of the delivery. The light fading from the window is your only clock, and as the shadows lengthen, the dust in the air turns from gold to a ghostly grey. You realize that the warmth of the wood you handle is the only comfort in an environment that treats your effort as a mere calculation of overhead and output. The stability of the old apprenticeship system is crumbling, replaced by the precarious reality of a piece-rate economy where a single injured finger means a week without bread. You are immersed in a landscape where the boundary between home and industry has vanished, leaving you to navigate a life defined by the density of the oak and the weight of the hammer. Every movement you make is part of a larger, invisible gear, turning the wheels of a nation that is outgrowing its own craftsmen. The physical reality of this transition is etched into the very grain of the boards you plan. It is a story of resistance against the inevitable tide of the machine. You are not just building furniture, you are trying to build a fortress against a future that views you as replaceable. The pressure is structural, the atmosphere is heavy, and the stakes are your very survival in a city that never sleeps and never stops consuming. This immersion into the soot and pine is only the beginning of understanding how the American urban soul was constructed, one splinter at a time, amidst the roar of progress. This journey into the heart of 19th century labor will reveal the hidden blueprints of the modern world, showing you exactly what was sacrificed so that the skyscrapers of the future could eventually rise. You will see that the wood under your hands is more than material. It is the evidence of a vanishing way of life. Make sure you are already subscribed to this channel, because here we delve into the depths of history to reveal the truths that textbooks tend to ignore ensuring that you never see the present with the same surprising eyes again. Officers from before. You step deeper into the interior of this American urban cell, where the boundary between a life lived and a life sold is as thin as a shaving of white oak. The workshop is not merely a room, it is a meticulously organized engine of survival, a spatial manifestation of the 19th century industrial squeeze. Every square inch of this floor is a calculation of necessity, where the placement of a lathe or the height of a sharpening stone determines the difference between a productive hour and a wasted motion. You feel the floor vibrate beneath your feet, not from machinery yet, but from the heavy, rhythmic thud of a neighbor's forge next door, a reminder that the city is a single, interconnected organism of labor. Above you, the ceiling is low, crisscrossed by thick, hand-hewn beams that have begun to sag under the weight of the family's living quarters on the floor above. You can hear the muffled scraping of chairs and the faint murmur of voices from overhead, a domestic layer resting precariously upon the foundation of industrial toil. The air here is a thick sensory battleground. To your left, the sharp, clean scent of freshly cut timber rises from the pile of planks waiting to be transformed, but this natural aroma is constantly assaulted by the acrid, oily smell of coal smoke drifting in from the narrow alleyway. This is the olfactory signature of the era, the struggle between the organic past and the fossil-fueled future. You run your hand over the primary workbench, noticing how the surface is polished to a glass-like smoothness by the friction of 1,000 forearms. This wood has become an extension of the human body, stained by sweat, linseed oil, and the occasional drop of dark blood from a slipped chisel. The organization here is absolute because it has to be. In a space no larger than a modern bedroom, you find the entire life cycle of a product. Near the door, raw lumber is seasoned. In the center, the heavy work of shaping and joinery occurs, and in the farthest, darkest corner, the delicate finishing and assembly take place. You realize that in this environment, clutter is more than a nuisance. It is a physical threat to your livelihood. Each tool has a specific shadow on the wall where it hangs, a silent demand for order in a city that feels increasingly chaotic. You look at the rack of molding planes. They're wooden bodies carved from beech, each one designed to create a specific curve for a wealthy merchant's library or a growing hotel's grand staircase. These tools are beautiful, yet they are also heavy, demanding a physical toll from your shoulders and wrists that no romantic history ever mentions. The light in this room is a scarce resource, captured by two small, distorted glass panes that offer a murky view of the brick wall across the street. You find yourself moving instinctively toward these patches of grey light, realizing that your entire workday is governed by the arc of the sun and the rising cost of tallow candles. As the afternoon wanes, the atmosphere grows denser, the fine dust of the workshop mixing with the humidity of a Philadelphia or Boston summer to create a film that coats your throat. You understand now that the workshop is a paradox of stability and fragility. It is a stable structure built to withstand the rigors of heavy manual work, yet it is fragile because its existence depends on the artisan's ability to remain faster and cheaper than the emerging factories. You see the specialized jigs and templates hanging from the rafters, early attempts to standardize production and compete with the coming wave of mass manufacturing. These wooden skeletons of future furniture represent a desperate attempt to maintain control over the craft. The sounds within these walls are a complex symphony of friction, the rasp of a file, the high-pitched whistle of a hand plane, and the dull thud of a mallet against a mortise chisel. Each sound tells you the state of the material and the sharpness of the edge. You begin to perceive the workshop not as a place of creative expression, but as a site of intense biological consumption, where your own energy is the fuel being burned to turn raw nature into urban infrastructure. The functional necessity of this space is cold and unforgiving. There is no room for decoration that does not serve a purpose. Even the scrap wood in the corner is meticulously sorted, destined to heat the family's stew or to be sold as kindling to those even poorer than the carpenter. You are standing at the heart of an era where the human hand was still the most sophisticated machine on the planet, but the walls are closing in. The density of the city outside is reflected in the density of the labor inside, creating a pressurized environment where every movement must be efficient. As you stand in the center of this organized chaos, you realize that the man who works here is not just making a table or a door. He is carving out a space for his own dignity in a world that is beginning to value the product more than the producer. This realization weighs on you like the heavy iron head of a sledgehammer. It is a profound structural reality that defines the very essence of American life in the 1850s. If you feel the weight of this history and the silent struggle of the hands that built the world we now inhabit, write in the comments, "The wood remembers the hand that shaped it." This is a phrase that carries the soul of the workshop, an emotional bridge to those who labored in the shadows of the industrial dawn. You feel the resonance of these words as you look around the cramped, soot-stained room, knowing that the story of this house is the story of a nation in the making. The anatomy of this workshop is the anatomy of a transformation that cannot be undone. And as you prepare to move from the workbench to the living quarters, the transition from the public face of work to the private reality of the family becomes the next layer of this immersive journey. The friction between the sawdust and the coal smoke is not just a sensory detail. It is the fundamental conflict of a century that promised progress, but delivered a relentless, grinding demand for more. You are now prepared to see how this pressure filtered through the floorboards into the very heart of the domestic sphere. Leaving the layer of sawdust behind, you ascend the narrow, steep staircase that leads from the workshop to the domestic heart of the house. The wood under your palm is smooth and greasy, coated with a century of palms seeking balance in the dark. As you reach the landing, the temperature changes. The cold, metallic dampness of the ground floor is replaced by a heavy, humid warmth that smells of boiled cabbage, wet wool, and the faint, sweet rot of old timber. This is the domestic pulse of a mid-19th century American city, a space where the rhythm of the family is forced to synchronize with the relentless ticking of the industrial clock. You find yourself in a room that serves as a kitchen, a dining hall, and a nursery all at once. The structural pressure of the city is visible here in the way the furniture is pushed against the walls. Every inch of the floorboards reclaimed for movement. Light is the most precious commodity you possess. The windows are small and deep-set, and because the neighboring tenement was built only 3 feet away, the sun never truly enters this room. It merely filters through a grey urban haze, casting long, distorted shadows that make the corners of the room feel cavernous and uncertain. You notice the hearth, a blackened brick moor that is the only source of heat and light after the sun sets. It is a demanding deity, requiring constant feeding with coal that must be hauled up those same narrow stairs you just climbed. The air is stagnant, thick with the particles of the city, soot from the nearby mills, dust from the street, and the exhaled breath of 6 people living in 2 rooms. You feel the physical weight of this confinement. In this era of rapid expansion, the American city was growing faster than its infrastructure could support, and you are living in the friction of that growth. The walls around you are papered with old newspapers to keep out the drafts, a literal collage of a world in transition. You watch the movements of the carpenter's wife, her hands never idle, mending a shirt by the flickering glow of a single tallow candle that sputters and smokes. The scarcity of resources is not an abstract concept here. It is a lived reality that dictates the timing of every meal and the depth of every sleep. You see the cradle tucked beneath the heavy oak table, a piece of furniture built by the carpenter during his few hours of rest, a testament to the fact that even his love is expressed through the medium of his labor. The silence is never absolute. Through the thin walls, you hear the muffled coughs of neighbors, the rattling of iron-rimmed wheels on the cobblestones below, and the distant haunting whistle of a steam locomotive. These sounds are the heartbeat of a new age, a reminder that the world outside is accelerating while the domestic world inside struggles to maintain its ancient equilibrium. The stability of the family unit is the only thing preventing the chaos of the industrial street from flooding through the door. You realize that the home is not a sanctuary of leisure, but a secondary workshop where the labor of maintenance is just as rigorous as the labor of production. The contrast between the abundance of the new department stores appearing on Broadway and the calculated scrimp of this hearth is staggering. You are an observer of a fragile balance, where a rise in the price of coal or a week of sickness could collapse the entire structure of this life. The domestic pulse is quick and shallow, a reflection of the anxiety that comes with living on the edge of the machine. The very air you breathe feels processed, heavy with the weight of 1,000 chimneys and the lack of green spaces. You look at the small tin plate on the table, reflecting the weak light, and you understand that every object in this room has been fought for. The structural reality of the 19th century city did not care for the comfort of its inhabitants. It cared only for their proximity to the means of production. You feel a sudden, sharp appreciation for the tenacity of the human spirit that manages to find warmth in such a constricted space. The hearth is the anchor, the only thing keeping the family from being swept away by the tide of the Industrial Revolution. As the evening deepens, the room grows smaller, the shadows encroaching until the only world that exists is the small circle of light around the fire. This is the ultimate test of endurance, a daily struggle to keep the domestic flame alive against the encroaching darkness of an indifferent century. You are immersed in the density of this survival, sensing how the physical constraints of the house mirror the social constraints of the working class. The city is a giant, grinding machine, and this room is one of its smallest, most vital gears. If you find value in these glimpses of a world that paved the way for our own, please give this video a like. Your support is the fuel that allows us to continue uncovering these forgotten layers of history, ensuring that the stories of those who built our foundations are never truly lost to the soot of time. You stand now at the precipice of the next revelation, where the friction of this domestic life meets the changing tides of the economy outside, preparing you to see how the very definition of progress began to tear at the seams of the carpenter's world. The pulse of the hearth is slowing as the fire dies down, but the pressure of the city remains, a constant low-frequency hum that promises no rest for the weary. You are ready to witness the final transformation of the craft into a commodity, as the friction of progress begins to reshape the very soul of the American worker. The morning air in the mid-1800s American city does not bring freshness, but a sharper, more urgent clarity to the friction that is beginning to tear at the foundations of your craft. You return to the workbench, yet the very wood under your hands feels different, as if the forest itself has sensed the approaching metal teeth of the large-scale mills. The friction of progress is no longer a metaphor. It is a physical resistance you encounter with every stroke of the plane. You are witnessing the moment when the manual's steady hand, once the ultimate arbiter of quality and structural integrity, begins to be measured against the unyielding, volatile speed of the machine age. You notice the change in the marketplace first. Customers who once spoke of the longevity of a mortise and tenon joint now ask only for the price per foot and the date of delivery. The stability of the old world, where a carpenter's reputation was built over decades of seasoning wood and perfecting a signature bevel, is being eroded by a new, frantic vocabulary of efficiency and volume. You feel the tremor of a steam-powered circular saw vibrating through the neighboring walls, a sound that mimics a scream, cutting through the rhythmic human pace of your own hand-sawing. This is the sound of valued labor. The machine does not tire, it does not breathe, and most importantly, it does not require the years of apprenticeship that you harden to master the idiosyncrasies of grain and knot. You look at your hands, calloused and stained, and realize they are becoming relics in a landscape of cast iron and grease. The technical contrast is brutal. Where you once spent hours selecting a specific plank of mahogany for its structural grain, the factory now churns out thin veneers that mask inferior, mass-produced pine. You are seeing the birth of the disposable world, a reality where objects are made to be replaced rather than repaired. This shift creates a profound psychological friction. You are caught between the pride of the artisan and the desperation of the worker. The city demands more housing, more furniture, and more infrastructure than 1,000 hand tools could ever provide. And this demand acts like a vacuum, sucking the soul out of the material. You feel the atmospheric shift in the workshop. The air is no longer just dusty, it is electric with the anxiety of obsolescence. Every time a new patent for a woodworking machine is announced in the local gazette, the invisible walls of your house seem to move inward, constricting your future. The speed of the 19th century American economy is a runaway train, and you are standing on the tracks with nothing but a wooden mallet. You observe how the very architecture of the city reflects this volatility. Buildings are rising overnight, framed with standardized balloon framing, a technique that favors speed and cheap nails over the heavy, interlocking timbers of the past. It is a fragile kind of progress, a structural gamble that trades the permanence of the hearth for the velocity of the market. You feel the weight of this gamble in the pit of your stomach. The social fabric is fraying alongside the wood fibers. The camaraderie of the guild is being replaced by the hierarchy of the factory floor, where the carpenter is no longer a master of his domain, but a tender of a mechanism. The contrast between the stability you were promised as a young apprentice and the precariousness of your current middle age is a gap that cannot be bridged by hard work alone. You are living through the evaluation of the human touch, a process that turns the unique into the uniform. The friction is everywhere, in the way the sunlight hits the jagged, machine-cut edges of new lumber, in the smell of cheap chemical glues replacing the slow-boiled hide resins of your youth, and in the hollow sound of a house built for profit rather than for generations. You are an observer of the first great American acceleration, and the cost of this speed is being extracted directly from your muscles and your dignity. The transition is not a smooth evolution. It is a jagged rupture that leaves the craftsman searching for a purpose in a world that only values the output. The physical reality of your work is becoming a ghost, a haunting reminder of a time when the man was the measure of the work. You stand at your bench. The shavings at your feet no longer represent progress, but the remnants of a vanishing identity. The city outside continues its roar. Indifferent to the fact that the foundations of its own beauty were laid by hands, it is now working to replace. This friction is the silent engine of the modern age, a force that reshapes not just the wood, but the very definition of what it means to be a productive member of society. You feel the urgency of this transformation, a pressure that demands you either adapt to the cold logic of the machine or be crushed by its gears. The American dream is being retooled, and the sawdust on your floor is the only witness to the struggle of the human hand to remain relevant in a world of iron. If you can feel the echoes of this struggle in the world we live in today, where the digital often replaces the tactile, then share this video with someone who values the history of the hands that built our world. Sharing this story is the only way to ensure that the friction of the past is not forgotten at the speed of the present. You are now prepared to enter the final chamber of this journey, where the timber of labor is elevated into the timber of legacy, and the final meaning of the carpenter's life is revealed amidst the ruins of the industrial dawn. The saw continues its scream, but your hand remains steady for one last, defiant cut. You stand one last time before the workbench, the wood grain beneath your fingers feeling like the very skin of the century you have helped to build. The physical world of the 19th century American city is no longer just a collection of bricks, soot, and pine. It has become a philosophical weight, a heavy timber of legacy that you carry upon your shoulders. You realize now that every doorframe you leveled and every floorboard you planned was a silent act of defiance against the encroaching anonymity of the machine. The elevation of this narrative moves beyond the cramped quarters and the smell of coal smoke to a much larger question. What does it mean for a nation to be born from the hands of men whose own souls were being systematically mechanized? You look at the shavings on the floor, curled like ancient scrolls, and you see them as the discarded pages of a history that values the skyscraper but forgets the scaffold. The structural reality of America was not forged in the boardrooms of the railroad tycoons, but in the calloused palms of those who understood the resistance of oak and the stubbornness of iron. You feel the profound contrast between the permanence of your craft and the volatile speed of the new economy. This is the ultimate realization of your journey through the carpenter's house. The stability you sought to build into the furniture was actually a search for stability in a society that was liquidizing everything into capital. You observe the city outside the window, now a sprawling labyrinth of industry, and you recognize that the soul of labor was not lost because it became faster, but because it became invisible. The carpenter's legacy is not found in a museum, but in the very bones of the buildings that still stand, holding up the weight of a modern world that rarely stops to ask whose hammer drove the nails. You are an observer of a transformation that reached into the very marrow of the human experience, turning the sacred act of creation into a mundane task of production. Yet, in this final elevation, you see the dignity that remains. There is a sacredness in the friction you felt, a testament to the fact that humans are not meant to be gears, but architects of their own reality. The timber of legacy is the realization that while the tools change and the cities grow, the fundamental need for a handcrafted life, a life of purpose and tangible impact, never truly disappears. You feel the echo of the 1850s in the digital hum of the 2020s, a reminder that the struggle to remain human in a world of machines is a cycle that never ends. The American urban soul was built on this tension, a bridge of wood spanning a river of steel. You have navigated the layers of this house from the soot of the threshold to the warmth of the hearth, and now you stand at the peak of its meaning. The house is more than a shelter, it is a witness. The carpenter was more than a worker. He was the pulse of a vanishing era. As you prepare to leave this immersive space, the weight of the hammer feels lighter, not because the work has ended, but because you finally understand its value. The legacy is the wood itself, seasoned by time and sweat, holding the memory of a hand that knew its grain. You are part of this continuity now, a witness to the construction of a nation that was built to last even as its builders were told they were replaceable. This is the final revelation that the beauty of the world is not found in its perfection, but in the evidence of the struggle to create it. You have seen the truth behind the pine and the soot, and it is a truth that demands to be remembered. Subscribe to this channel to continue exploring the invisible foundations of our civilization, because only by understanding the hands that shape the past can we have the clarity necessary to carve our own future. If you've watched this far, it's because you like this case. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Your participation is what keeps the flame of historical curiosity alive in this sea of digital superficiality. Don't forget to enjoy this documentary if it brought a new perspective on the relationship between man and his work. Share this video with those who appreciate the depth and texture of our human heritage, helping us reach more minds willing to delve into what really matters. The silence of the workshop is now filled with his understanding, and the journey through the carpenter's house ends here. But the echo of his work will continue to vibrate in every beam and every joint of the cities we still inhabit. You now carry the memory of the oak and the lesson of resistance, ready to see the modern world not as a given, but as a work in constant and laborious construction.